Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the SFX Loop. This show is going to be about horror cult, that kind of stuff, and there'll probably be a few off-topic movies here and there, just movies that I love in general. I'm going to focus on physical media releases, histories about the movies, my own personal experiences involving those movies. So we're going to see how this goes and see if people find it interesting. So this first episode is focusing on a movie that's kind of near and dear to me and has always been a favorite of mine ever since I was a kid. The original 1980 Friday the 13th. Around 1979, Sean S. Cunningham was living in Westport, Connecticut. He was working out of his home office, basically. He had made the movie Last House on the Left with Wes Craven, and they had actually filmed it in his house and in the surrounding areas near his house. And he had also made a couple of other movies, like these kids' movies. He had just finished making a movie called Manny's Orphans, which was about a soccer team, basically. And at that point, he was starting to think to himself, like, okay, where am I going to go? What's going on with my career? How am I going to move forward from here? Because, he had made a slew of independent films, drive-in movies during that era, but, nothing had really, except for Last House. Last House was a bit of a success, and he was a producer on Last House. Wes Craven actually directed it. Things just weren't, he had a film career, it was kind of floating along. With all the success of the horror movies that were very popular at the time, Halloween being the big one, because Halloween was a huge success, and that was an independent horror film that became like a huge success. They decided, well, let's try to make a horror movie. Let's see what we can do with the horror movie. But what are we going to make this horror movie about? They didn't even know Sean S. Cunningham and the people that he was working with didn't even know. He actually went and got Steve Miner, who had worked on Last House on the Left with him, his friend Steve Miner. Didn't even really know what they were going to do. So they said, okay, well, let's just pick a holiday, pick a name. Halloween was popular. Let's go with Friday the 13th. Okay, Friday the 13th. What are we going to do with this movie? They decided, they pulled a crazy stunt, very reminiscent to the early days of like Roger Corman and stuff like that. They contacted Variety. They created a poster, a print ad that said, "The most horrifying movie you'll ever see," or something along those lines. And it said Friday the 13th, the most horrifying movie you'll ever see. They had no script, no movie, no nothing. And in 1979, they paid Variety and they put this ad out. I think as I read, it came out on like July 4th or something like that, the 4th of July. They paid for that ad in Variety, not expecting anything to happen, because at that point they had not many prospects. And all of a sudden, people showed interest. Distribution companies, other, financial entities that wanted to put money into making a movie, they started seeing, oh wow, this sounds great. We want to see your movie. They didn't have a movie yet. They didn't have nothing. So they scraped up $500,000, headed to New Jersey, got a bunch of people, friends, crew, cast a bunch of new, fresh, young actors from the area, from the New York, New Jersey area. They went to this boys' camp. It was this camp they rented out, and they went there, and history, there you have it, Friday the 13th. They shot and made the movie independently on their own for $500,000. And it's safe to say when that movie came out, it was a huge success. Now, people tend to forget some things, though. Because you hear Friday the 13th, you immediately think Jason, Friday the 13th. Well, the original Friday the 13th, Jason was not the killer in the original Friday the 13th. Spoiler alert, the killer was Mrs. Voorhees, Jason's mother. The whole idea was Jason had drowned in the lake, and she was upset because the camp counselors were not paying attention while Jason drowned in the lake. So then, every year they tried to open the camp, she would show up and she'd kill off the camp counselors so that they couldn't open the camp. And that was the story for the original Friday the 13th movie. think about the original Friday the 13th movie, okay? You've got Kevin Bacon is in the original Friday the 13th movie, all right? Now, he's the most notable name out of the entire cast for everybody that was in it. Oh, no, not so much, though. Betsy Palmer played Jason's mother. And she was the killer throughout the movie. Although she technically wasn't there for the whole shooting. She was there just to shoot her stuff at the end. But she played the killer at the end of the original Friday the 13th movie. Betsy Palmer was a huge actress from like the 50s and the 60s. Basically, she was doing what a lot of big actors at that time were doing. Just, you know, making some money to live. I think she said at the time she needed a new car. So she needed money, so she took the money to do the movie. She figured low-budget horror movie, nobody's ever going to see it, nobody's going to care, and she played Jason's mother in the movie. And much to her dismay, as the years went on, the movie became very popular and very famous, and years later she was signing autographs at conventions and dealing with fans, never thinking that this little $500,000 movie that was shot at a camp out in New Jersey was going to turn into this like major success. I mean, you've got 8 original Friday the 13th movies. Then New Line came along. They made Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X. Then they decided to mix the Nightmare on Elm Street and the Friday the 13th movies together, and they made Freddy vs. Jason. So, and then there's the remake movies. It was supposed to be a part 2 to the remake, but it never happened. Plus, there was a Friday the 13th TV series, which had absolutely nothing, I mean nothing to do with Jason and camp and all that stuff. It was essentially an anthology series about a small, like a curio shop, like an antique shop, and they had haunted objects, like possessed objects in their antique shop. And every episode that they would find out that somebody had this possessed object and they'd have to go get it and bring it back to the shop. And that was basically the structure of the Friday the 13th TV series, which had some awesome episodes, because I remember watching the Friday the 13th TV series late night on, like, I think it was CBS or something like that. It was like midnight or something like that. I used to stay up, watch that. I used to watch the new Twilight Zones, the 80s Twilight Zones, which I loved. And that was like my late night routine when I was in high school, like when I was staying up late watching TV. Because people tend to forget, I mean, I'm 48 years old. When I was growing up, there was no Netflix, there was no nothing like that. If you wanted to watch something over again, you had to have it on VHS. And just wait for it to come on TV, or find a channel that it was on TV. Maybe you recorded it off cable, or you dubbed a videotape that you rented from the video store. Video stores were a big thing back when I was growing up. It was the VHS era. I've been collecting, I'm almost 50, I'm like 48 years old. So I've been collecting home media for a very, very long time. I started out with Friday the 13th back in the VHS days. So I owned Friday the 13th on video. I owned it on VHS. Then I went from VHS, I owned it on VHS, I went from VHS, I owned it on Laserdisc, which actually technically came out around the same time as the VHS, because there was never any really good version of Friday the 13th on Laserdisc. It was mostly the same transfer that was on the VHS, which was the old school pan scan transfer. We didn't get a widescreen version of the original Friday the 13th until like the 90s, when DVD actually started coming out. And that's when Paramount actually released Friday the 13th in, I think originally it was in a box set on DVD. And it had like 1 through 8, which they've reissued those Friday the 13th box sets over and over and over again. People tend to forget that back in the 80s and even the 90s to a certain degree, when we watched Friday the 13th, this uncut version of Friday the 13th that existed, which is like the unrated version, was not easy to come across. Apparently it was available on an import VHS that you could get that was released by, I think, Warner Brothers in the UK, in European territories. But we didn't have that version. That's the version that it contains a little bit more blood during Kevin Bacon's death. You see like more blood coming out of his mouth. That's more vicious at the beginning when Annie gets her neck sliced in the woods. You actually see it and she floats down. Oddly enough, one of the home video versions on VHS had that sequence where she got her neck slit and she went down the tree. but it didn't have any of the extra stuff like, you know, the bloodier death of Kevin Bacon, and the end when the mother's head got cut off was longer and a little bit different, and you could see it was more graphic. I think there was a few other little things here and there throughout the movie, but generally speaking, it was the murder sequences that had been chopped down. But that longer cut now is been preserved and is available in current home video editions that you can watch full normal quality as if it was never hard to come by. And then when Blu-ray came around, we were like, yay, we get Blu-ray. And then we got a Blu-ray release of Friday the 13th as well. So finally we got like the piece de resistance, like the ultimate Friday the 13th collection, which ended up being the Scream Factory one that came out. It's probably a few years back. I don't know the exact date offhand, but it was a full-on box set, and it's got all the Friday the 13th movies, including the remake and the New Line stuff. Now there is a 4K release that just came out of the original Friday the 13th, and I do have it. I'm actually in the process of selling it. I think Scream Factory's release of Friday the 13th, their 4K scan and transfer, is the best possible way to watch Friday the 13th currently. I don't think there's any real reason to get that 4K because Paramount like fudged up the Dolby Vision. So it's just, everything is blown out, like the skies are blown out. It looks horrible. You can watch it in HDR10 and it doesn't look half bad, but it only has the newer 5.1 remix of the audio, and it doesn't have the original mono soundtrack. So to each their own, but personally I came to the realization that Scream Factory just did an awesome job with their 4K Blu-ray. I mean, it doesn't need to look any better than that, and it looks really good. It's the same master, just color timed properly and done right. Quick mention here, I didn't really think about this when I was actually filming my interview, but if you're interested in books on the subject of horror films, there's a really cool book called Crystal Lake Memories. There was also a documentary as well that focused on the entire Friday the 13th series, but this book is awesome. It's a must-have. You can probably still get the hardbound version. I don't know if it's out of print or not, but this goes through the entire Friday the 13th series, pictures, stills. There's gonna be some photographs and stuff in this video taken from that book. So I just wanted to mention that if you're into Friday the 13th and you want to get some kind of book regarding the making of the film, this is the book to have, because this thing is, it's approved by the original filmmakers, and it's awesome. It's a really, really cool, like coffee table style book. Tom Savini did all the special effects for the movie. Now, Tom Savini went on to do tons of stuff. He had worked with George Romero prior on Dawn of the Dead, and he moved forward working on this Friday the 13th movie with Sean S. Cunningham. Him and Sean S. Cunningham got along really well. Sean S. Cunningham actually says that when they were working on the movie, right before they started filming it, Tom Savini came up and he was basically living at his house, living out of his car and living at Sean S. Cunningham's house, and they were working out all the special effects. They wanted to do something special with it. They wanted to do something like fancy with the movie, you know? They wanted cool murder sequences and cool death sequences, which at the time was something new because Halloween had just come out. You had a movie called Black Christmas earlier made by Bob Clark that had a bit of an effect, and it was essentially a slasher film. You also had some European stuff like Twitch of the Death Nerve by Mario Bava. That was the American title for it. I can't remember off the top of my head. Bay of Blood was essentially a translation of the Italian title for the movie. So Bay of Blood, Twitch of the Death Nerve, and oddly enough, those have a lot of death sequences in them. There's a death sequence in Bay of Blood, the Mario Bava movie, that is Friday the 13th Part 2 completely ripped it off. I mean, it's like the same death sequence, 100%. Yeah, so I mean, if you're curious about that, check that out. I don't want to spoil everything, but it's a kind of a personal attachment to this movie to me because I actually named my daughter Alice after the final girl of the original Friday the 13th. My wife and I were watching, like we always do, when a Friday the 13th pops up, we usually pop in a Friday the 13th movie. we were watching the first movie. We got to the end and we were trying to come up with names for our daughter. And we were like, Alice, that's a great name. And we're like, everyone's gonna think it's Alice in Wonderland, but it's not. It was actually Alice from Friday the 13th. But the interesting story about that is I used to go to this convention, this horror movie convention called Rock and Shock. Now, I'm pretty sure 2019 was the last year they did it. And we went that year because Adrienne King was gonna be there. And my daughter Alice was what? Well, she was either 4 or 5. She was around 5. And we decided that we were going to bring her to me, even though she didn't care, she had no clue. But we were gonna bring her to meet Adrienne King. We were gonna get a picture with Adrienne King. It was gonna be cool. So we did. We actually met Adrienne King, and while we were there with her, we were just talking in general, you know, like making small chit chat. And I said, I named my daughter after you. And then she says, what's your name? And I'm like, oh, my name's Jason. And she goes, really? I'm like, what? And she goes, Jason and Alice. I'm like, oh man, I didn't even make, the stupid part about it is I never really thought about that. I never really made that connection. So do you know where your name came from?
Yeah.
Where did we get your name from?
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, what was it named after?
From Alice.
Alice?
You told me she was the survivor at the end of the movie.
Actress name is Adrienne King, yes. And you got to meet her at the Rock and Shock Film Festival. Do you remember that at all?
Kind of.
Vaguely, yeah. What are your thoughts on that? You told me everyone thinks your name is Alice from Alice in Wonderland all the time?
Yeah.
But have you ever told anybody that your name is from the movie Friday the 13th?
Probably not, no, I don't think so.
Okay. You know, you can look at the camera instead of actually just playing your game while I'm interviewing you. Honestly, my final thoughts on Friday the 13th for this video, I love it. The original 1980 Friday the 13th is a great movie. If they had never made any sequels, which I love the sequels, I can watch all of them. But honestly, I'm kind of a 1 through 7 kind of guy. But by part 7, my attention span starts to wane for the later movies. But the original, 1 through 8, actually, with Jason Takes Manhattan as the last one. I mean, for me, that's classic. For my generation, it was every single year there was a new Friday the 13th movie coming out in the theater. It was our equivalent of like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or something like that. Like, it was just a new Friday the 13th movie, a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and at a point in time, it was a new Child's Play movie, a new Chucky movie as well. These were like the main franchises where every single year a new movie was coming out. So we just wait and we go see the next Friday the 13th movie. They became a total commodity at a certain point because it was like you get a bunch of teenagers, put them in a camp, kill them off. That was the plot. And you know what? We were okay with that. We enjoyed that. We weren't looking for crazy, heady, like, important films. It didn't have to be amazing. It had to have a bunch of cool kills and some interesting characters and a couple of jokes here and there, and we were totally cool with it. And the original Friday the 13th set the tone for the 80s slasher boom, man. It set the tone for a bunch of teenagers getting killed off, either at a camp or anywhere. I mean, it could be anywhere. It could be in a mall. It could be at a camp. It could be anywhere. A bunch of teenagers getting slashed off in a suburban setting, then you're kind of copying Halloween. All these movies were horribly derivative of each other. But yeah, I love the original Friday the 13th, and I'll continue watching it over and over again for the rest of my time, as long as I'm around. And I'm totally cool with that, so if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, leave me a comment underneath the video. I'll check them out. I always do. I try to comment to anything that makes sense to comment to, or if I have something to say about something that somebody says, then I'll comment about it. I also make videos regarding guitar gear, amps, guitars, pedals, all that stuff. That's my main focus of the channel, the SFX Loop. But this is going to be kind of like a side project for the SFX Loop. This is like the sub tier here. This is going to be the SFX Loop. And I'm going to talk about my love of horror and cult films and the stories I have regarding these horror and cult films and what I think about new releases from this company or that company or what I'm buying and what I'm collecting. So if that stuff interests you at all, please subscribe. And if you're into the guitar stuff, Subscribe as well, because every other week you're going to get a guitar video from the FX Loop, and then every other week you're going to get a SFX video. So I hope you enjoyed this. Take care. Check out Friday the 13th, 1980. If you've never seen it, you won't be disappointed. See you next time.